Good evening and thanks for watching this late edition of WGXA News at 10. I'm Jayla Whitfield. We're going to get started with some breaking news tonight. Just into the newsroom within a few hours, a massive manhunt is underway after an officer was shot and killed today. Check out these photos of the scene earlier today. It happened in the parking lot of Shiloh Middle School outside of Snellville, Georgia. Monumental developments in Washington, D.C. today as Judge Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court in one of the most controversial votes seen in years. Now, protesters from all over the country are protesting the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Take a look in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, and outside of the Supreme Court. Now, in Atlanta, women survivors, domestic workers, and allies protested at the Woodruff Park and marched to the Russell Federal Building. Protesters also gathered on the Supreme Court steps. Demonstrations are expected to continue throughout the weekend. Also, check out this video. Protesters even climbed the Scottish statue to protest the swearing in of Brett Kavanaugh. Tonight, more deaths are being reported in Hurricane Michael's aftermath. So far, at least 36 people have died across Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. The number rose today after a local medical examiner confirmed the death of a woman in Bay County, Florida, bringing the death toll in the Florida Panhandle to 26 alone. Michael was one of the strongest storms to hit the continental U.S. in more than a decade. Well, President Donald Trump and First Lady in the mid-state surveying damage left behind by Hurricane Michael. The couple landed at Robins Air Force Base around 4 p.m. today after touring hard-hit areas in the Florida Panhandle. Now, President Trump has pledged that the impacted areas will have all the help they need to get their communities back up and running. The Georgia Cotton Commission estimates hundreds of millions of dollars in losses because of Hurricane Michael. Now, Taylor Seals with the commission says cotton farmers have reported losses of anywhere from 20 to 100%. Multiple tornado warnings were issued for the area today, and this footage is from the first tornado that touched down. Now, WGXA's meteorologist Matt Mackey is in the WGXA Weather Center tracking, and Matt, we've got a different type of storm headed our way. Yesterday's early voting totals are 1,544 people that voted. That brings the total of this week's early voting to 6,760. Early voting continues next week up until November 2nd. Visit Macon kicked off their rock candy tours today. Organizer officials say the tours will start every Saturday at 10 a.m., leaving from the Visit Downtown Macon's Visitor Center. Leaders say while on the tour, you will get to hear the history of Macon and how music plays a big part in the city. Georgians crowded the streets of MLK Jr. and Cherry Street this afternoon for the third annual Open Streets Macon. Now, our WGXA's Brianna Giles has more. Brianna, what can you tell us? A Chicago police officer is facing decades in prison after being convicted in one of the most closely watched trials in the city's history. Jason Van Dyke is the first Chicago officer to be convicted of murder in an on-duty shooting in nearly 50 years. CNN's Ryan Young has the details.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of second-degree murder.
Nearly 4 years after the shooting of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, a jury found Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke guilty of second-degree murder and 16 counts of aggravated battery on Friday. The verdict marking a culmination to the racially charged case that became emblematic of decades of tension between Chicago's urban communities and the city's police force. The shooting was captured on a grainy police dashcam video with no audio. Van Dyke told investigators he fired in self-defense after McDonald lunged at him with a knife. The video shows Van Dyke shooting McDonald 16 times. None of the other officers at the scene fired their weapons. It wasn't until 13 months after the incident that a judge ordered the city to release the video.
16 shots and a cover-up.
The video ignited protests, a Justice Department civil rights investigation, criticism of the city's mayor, and eventually the ouster of the police superintendent.
I shot him.
In an unusual move Tuesday, Van Dyke took the witness stand in his own defense.
His face had no expression. His eyes were just bugging out of his head. He had just these huge white eyes just staring right through me.
At times becoming visibly emotional as he alleged the 17-year-old ignored repeated commands to drop his knife before the officer opened fire.
He waved the knife from his lower right side upwards, across his body, towards my left shoulder.
Prosecutors sparred with Van Dyke over discrepancies in his testimony that the teenager raised his knife toward officers, which cannot be seen in the dash cam video.
Have you ever seen LaQuan McDonald do that on one of those videos?
The video doesn't show my perspective.
Van Dyke's lawyer says he was not surprised by the verdict and plans to appeal.
Now, Van Dyke faces a maximum of 20 years in prison.